Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Hash, your daily beat on crypto and culture. My name is Naomi Brockwell, and I'm delighted to be joined by other wonderful co-hosts. We have Jen Sanasie, Ben Powers, Will Foxley, and Zack Seward. Welcome to the show. It is another wonderful Monday, awesome week lined up for us here on The Hash. We're going to start off the day talking about what's going on in baseball. Zack, I'm going to swing this over to you.
Nice throw, pal. Let's turn to the sports beat.
Kind of a curveball.
Hey-o.
Didn't you miss us, Will?
No. Happy Monday. Happy Monday, folks. So let's turn to the Oakland A's, the lovable losers of the Bay Area sports scene. The Oakland A's announced over the weekend that they would be accepting Bitcoin for rights to use their luxury suites. So this is another hack at the Bitcoin payments use case. I think we saw a lot of excitement around this when Tesla announced that it was going to be accepting Bitcoin payments on Tesla vehicles. I guess my question is to you, Naomi, sports aside, I know sports are not your favorite topic, but sports aside, how do we think about all this excitement around Bitcoin payments? Are we going to see a lot of suites sold in Bitcoin this year?
That's a great question. What's interesting about payments in Bitcoin is it's just gone straight to luxury use cases. You've got people selling suites at baseball stadiums. You got Teslas, all these things. We used to think that Bitcoin was going to be this thing for the unbanked, and that was the narrative that we would talk about it in terms of. And it's really evolved into something else. I mean, if we think about it, if we think about like high transaction fees these days, it essentially renders any UTXO under $20 useless because there's no way you can send a UTXO for a $20 fee if it's under $20. So it really eliminates, I think it's like 15% of all Bitcoins in terms of use case. And it's just pushed it straight into this like high spending area, which is super interesting to me because when you're spending, tens of thousands of dollars, it doesn't matter whether you spend $10 or $6 or $20 or anything. So I'm really interested to see where this goes in terms of these luxury use cases and if it gains traction there.
So let's talk price point. So you can buy a luxury suite from the A's for $64,800, I think it was, in fiat terms, or a Bitcoin, depending on what the price may be at that point in time. So over the weekend, notably, Bitcoin broke through the 60,000 mark for the first time, and we've since settled back down into the mid 50,000 range, which speaks to some of the volatility that maybe makes CFOs nervous about accepting Bitcoin payments. Will, is this just a time preference thing? Are the A's, famous for their Moneyball approach to being a scrappy young team? Are they expressing their long time preference when it comes to hoarding treasury assets? Give me a smart take here.
A smart take on baseball. You're not going to get that from me. I think that no, I'm proud of that fact. Baseball is never mind. Another topic. I think it's an interesting move.
Fight this out.
No, there's a long-standing feud between Zack and I.
It's true.
I think it's obvious that it's a bandwagon move. It's smart. I mean, if you type in Oakland A's, you get Bitcoin. You type in Bitcoin, you get Oakland A's on Google. So smart for them. And if Bitcoin goes up and someone decides to give them Bitcoin for a suite, they make it's 100K. They make 40K off of this. So pretty simple. I think Naomi brought up a really interesting point when I want to move back to is I think originally everyone was like Bitcoin's for the unbanked, but it's the tech itself has evolved where it's more efficient for people to use Bitcoin for really large payments, which makes sense for luxury use cases. I think we're just going to keep seeing that over time as whales kind of purchase, I think there's private planes now you can buy Bitcoin with, or at least book flights with. And it makes sense for those purchases because it's cheaper than a giant wire transaction they normally would have to trade or use. So that's kind of what's interesting to me. I want to toss it down to Ben and see what your perspective is on this. I also want to note that's a Death Star rated microphone you got there. So nice work on that.
What is going on?
My adapter finally came.
It's frightening.
We're going to work that one out. I decided to not do the labor for it before the show today. No, I think, that really is the point that stuck out to me here. We talk about can you buy coffee with Bitcoin? No, you can't really. But it's you can buy a baseball suite. And again, it just sort of shows as the suits kind of approach Bitcoin in a lot of ways, we're going to see more and more of these things crop up and maybe less and less attention for the microtransactions that make sense to everyday people. And I think that's sort of It's a frustrating thing to me because, I don't plan on buying any Oakland A's suite anytime soon, but I really think that it is a issue that we're going to have to address going forward, because the whole point of Bitcoin was to be disruptive about the financial system. And right now we're not seeing that. We're just seeing this sort of retrenched inequities being played out in real time, because the Oakland A's, make headlines when they say, hey, we're going to offer Bitcoin for this, even though that really doesn't have an impact on the vast, vast majority of people around the world.
All right, hear me out before I kick this to Jen. Sports as a microcosm for broader societal change. We have the Bitcoin for the luxury payments. And as we saw recently with Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban saying that they would accept Dogecoin for payment, maybe we're seeing a bifurcation here, right? Bitcoin for the luxury item.
The Doge thing is very different.
Dogecoin for a beer and a hot dog. So anyway, I think in sports we're actually starting to see this interesting conversation around what crypto can be in the payments realm. And I'm just curious, Jen, what are you looking toward? Is there a number? Is there a threshold that you're keeping an eye out for, whether we're seeing this thing click or not?
Well, I don't know if I have an answer to that, but yeah, sports are just leading the way, maybe, for us with Bitcoin. Naomi, I want to toss it back to you. We were talking about the unbanked being left behind. And what is the solution for the unbanked? I know you follow this not only here, but in multiple different countries, and we're looking at the use case for DeFi and different cryptocurrencies in a lot of different countries. What's the solution for the unbanked? Because every time we talk, every single day, it just feels like they're getting left further and further behind.
I mean, I disagree there, actually. I think it's getting more and more promising, and it's exciting to me. When Bitcoin was created, it was the only thing that used blockchain technology. It was like the first blockchain, if you don't count like Scott Stornetter's work, and if you just kind of count its use case in a vastly broader sense. And so since then, the cat's been out of the bag. People have been, trying out this new technology in all kinds of different areas. There's been all kinds of innovation in terms of payments and use cases. We have like the whole Ethereum DeFi world and NFTs. We have, loans. We have, artworks. We have, like payments, P2P. You have all kinds of like different interesting things that this is being applied to. And we are really seeing like different tribes emerge where we're carving out these use cases, and people are going to certain coins for certain things. Like, you're not going to Dogecoin because you're looking for a safe investment for your future, a hedge against economic instability, right? No, it's very funny that something with an infinite supply. But it's very interesting to see these niches get carved out, and so I'm more optimistic than ever because we are seeing lots and lots of payments being used, and people starting to promote this more. If it's getting headlines by this, luxury use case, that's great, because people can start to think, well, how can I start to incorporate this into my daily life? How can I get a part of this? And I think that's how it's going to move more to the masses. So we'll see what happens there.
Sounds good. Go A's. Baseball season starts April 1st for all you baseball fans out there. With that said, let's kick it over to Will
Put it on the editorial
Foxley,
calendar.
noted baseball hater, with an update on Ethereum 2.0. What is up, Will?
I'm glad to hate baseball. I hope everyone follows me one day. So let's talk about Ethereum. So I was on vacation last week, but the miners were not. They were up in revolt. Apparently, they do not like EIP 1559, which is kind of changing the whole transaction fee method for working with Ethereum. If you've ever used Bitcoin or some sort of blockchain, you know that you have to send a fee along with your payment. In the same way that Visa kind of bakes in a fee and normally is issued to the merchant, Bitcoin and Ethereum make you pay the fee upfront, and it'll be like in your wallet, costs maybe 2% of the total transaction, a lot of times less. And miners recently in Ethereum have just been gorging on the Ethereum fees. It's been nuts, millions upon millions of dollars weekly, and it's been pretty great for them. But it's not great for the average user. And so now a big proposal is going to be put into the Ethereum blockchain in July in a hard fork, and that will address, to a degree, some of the transaction fee problems with Ethereum. Notably, it'll just make Ethereum easier to use. Won't necessarily decrease Ethereum transaction fees, but it will make miner revenues much lower. Miners weren't very happy about this, and they started talking about some ways that they could hard fork the network with a 51% attack, and they're kind of thinking of ways to be hostile towards the network and make sure that this proposal doesn't go in. At this point, they can't do much. It's kind of a nothing burger, in my opinion. But the Ethereum developers and Ethereum ecosystem writ large is pretty upset about the miners trying to hold up the network. And they are moving for a quicker push to ETH2, even though ETH2 is not necessarily ready. So Vitalik drew up some specs that have already kind of been floating out there on some forums for moving ETH1 into ETH2 pretty quickly. And it could happen by the end of this year or even quicker. So it's pretty interesting in Ethereum land. We're seeing miners versus devs versus the ecosystem. So I want to toss this down to Naomi. When you see this, do you think of the Bitcoin scaling wars in 2017, or does this remind you of anything else that you've seen?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. It's sort of this debate, like how much power do the miners have? And this has been thrown around that when they're talking about this, I've seen some tweets, people saying, well, we get all the miners over there, then we're going to move all the value over to this new network. No one's going to want Ethereum anymore. It's going to be trash because no one's using it. I think that's a little backwards because people look to the use cases on the network primarily, as far as I can see. They look to see like what they can do. At the moment, Ethereum has amazing first mover advantage in terms of the DeFi space, and it's just taking other chains so long to catch up, which is why they're so far ahead. So in order to transplant all of those things over and get them onto this new chain, that's going to be a lot of work. I just don't see all that value moving just because the miners are. You would have to get all the people who are actually using the network for these use cases to move over. That's what's fascinating about the crypto world as well. And that's why I love it, because we're kind of seeing in real time these, game theory wars play out and how these things actually work out in real time. Because the fascinating thing about Bitcoin was that it was a mix of tech and game theory, and those things had to work, in tandem. And when it was first released on the cryptography mailing list, people immediately hated it because they were like, I can see all these ways that you could poke holes through it. And when they started to think about incentive structures, they realized, oh, wait, no, this is kind of held up by incentive structures. That's how it's made robust. And so in the Ethereum case, you are kind of seeing how this game theory plays out and why it does help to kind of further entrench Ethereum. Like if the miners can't get any traction here, it really just goes to show, how all these things have to work in this careful balance. It's a fascinating world. I love it.
I'm going to toss it down to Zack because we've been tracking Ethereum for a few years now. You specifically have been editing on Ethereum for years. Right now, do you think ETH2 and ETH1 are kind of to me, they're in a crisis moment where a lot of people are expecting ETH2 to be something and it's not going to be that for a while. But now we have miners kind of pushing the network forward in a different direction. So how do you take it from an editing standpoint or from your larger perspective?
From my larger perspective, I think the larger stuff here on governance and incentive systems and working these decentralized economies out at scale is really fascinating, right? You have these different constituencies, these different stakeholders who obviously have different economic incentives. And what's happening is we're seeing this stuff being tested, right? Hard fork has always been the option to vote with your feet and do your own thing. If it came to that, I would be kind of shocked. It was interesting to see Vitalik sort of step into this storm and get these things on the table fairly quickly. But yeah, I think there is generally sort of a misunderstanding of how soon ETH 2.0 is likely to land. I think it's still a couple years out likely. So for right now, Ethereum 1x is seeing success, and it's going to be interesting to see how they port all that value over. But yeah, I think I think my broader takeaway here is just these broad constituencies who always aren't going to be aligned on incentives, and we're seeing that play out in a really interesting way.
And those constituencies are just going to get larger, right? As we see more mass adoption of cryptocurrencies, and we see part of the reason Ethereum's surging in popularity right now is all the work being done around NFTs and things like that. And so, as you draw in more audiences, these stakeholder groups are going to shift and change. And you're going to have, Zack, I think to your point, the battle of expectations around what people and what world people are entering into. And so I'm really curious, conflict is always interesting just because it really does show kind of where people are coming from and what their core incentives are. And Naomi, you kind of talked about people are acting in their own sort of best interests, and that's being played out in real time right now. And so I'm curious about how your average users are going to start reacting to all this once they get a greater understanding of like, oh crap, like, wait, a hard fork could actually happen, which is not something your average person might be thinking about when they come onto these networks. And so as they start to scale, I just think that there's going to be some really rapid education, and fighting that game of expectations and what people are presuming is going to be easy to access or going to occur is something that the core devs and the miners and everybody else that has been a part of this community is going to have to really work on, because I really don't think, people are diving much below the surface of it right now.
Yeah, I hope that this helps educate people in a broader sense about economics and game theory, because this is something that generally people, they don't learn about this in school. They don't know how money operates. They don't really understand these financial instruments and things like game theory. And so actually having them as part of their life, if they're like, I'm diving into Ethereum because it's really cool and I can get Nyan Cat, digital JPEG or whatever, however they're getting into the world, and then suddenly they have to deal with all of these, like they have to deal with self-custody. They have to deal with, the idea of inflation. They have to kind of get to know these concepts because it affects your world if you're in the cryptocurrency world. I think that's really cool because I think we're making people smarter by getting them involved in crypto.
Yeah. One quick question for you guys. If you were a investor, would you buy Coinbase knowing that they transact a lot of their volume in Ethereum and there could be a potential hard fork this summer?
Will, let me stop you there. You save that question for next show, okay?
That's a good question.
We gotta take a break, okay? We can do a whole conversation on that later. I'm gonna think about that. But in the meantime, I'm gonna throw to the break and I'm gonna do a tease about DC Comics, NFTs, and IP. Oh my, that's intellectual property. Anyway, coming up, stick with it. It's The Hash.
Yeah, let's do it. Welcome back to The Hash, everyone. So I'm going to take our attention over to Australia and what's going on there at the moment. So the Reserve Bank of Australia Governor Philip Lowe said that Australia could one day have its own version of digital currency. It's kind of this interesting concept when you talk about governments getting involved in crypto. I think the Daily Mail headline said like Australian version of Bitcoin. And no, Ben, I'm going to throw to you in a second because you have a lot of issues with that headline. But to give you a little bit of details about what the Australian government and what the Reserve Bank are thinking of. So the Reserve Bank of Australia, they're apparently conducting research on the technologies and policy implications of a potential wholesale central bank digital currency. They say that big banks in the future could exchange money via a new digital currency instead of doing transactions in Australian dollars, and they would use a distributed ledger technology to support the settlement of transactions, generally with interbank payments. So this brings up a lot of questions because you have governments around the world talking about this. Obviously, they're worried. There's a lot of capital flight. We talked last week about how, the yields on 10-year treasury bonds are going up because no one wants to buy them. People used to think of these as the safe thing people would put their money into. They don't want to do it anymore. And where is the money going? I'm not sure because it's not going into gold. But lots of people are getting involved with Bitcoin and governments are starting to maybe get worried about that. And so you have a lot of governments kind of jumping on the bandwagon, but I don't see how like a digital currency with a centralized ledger is any different to what they have at the moment. They have centralized databases with their digital money in ones and zeros. They don't have vaults filled with cash. So I honestly don't see how this is going to make a huge amount of difference if they're just controlling these ledgers. But I'll throw to the group to get your takes on this. Ben, just dig into this headline for me. Tell me all the issues you have.
I mean, I'm glad the Daily Mail is working on deals with Google and Facebook so that they can spread incredibly misleading headlines like this. Let's just be very clear that this is not a version of Bitcoin in any way, shape, or form. This is just a digital version of currency as it currently exists. And I think that, what I got frustrated with there is even the finance minister who was speaking about this didn't use the word Bitcoin at all. He used digital currencies. He talked about central bank digital currencies, which is what these are. They are not a version of Bitcoin, just because, like you said, Naomi, it really is just a parallel system of creating kind of digital cash within the current economic models that exist. It's just a way for governments to have greater control over it, have a much greater level of transparency into what money is being spent and how it's being used. And these are sort of things that, the whole ethos of cryptocurrency was set up to depart from. So just to make sure that that is very clear from the outset is maybe where I just want to start this conversation. But, Zach, what are your thoughts on this one now that we've cleared that misgiving up?
I still want to rag on them for that headline. It's so bad. The Australian version of Bitcoin. Come on, bro. Come on, dude. And in the bullet points in the deck, it was like Elon Musk bought Bitcoin. They're just playing the game, man. Those Daily Mail guys are out there. They're like, there it is. Look at that. Look at that second bullet. It had nothing to do with nothing. Anyway.
Well, it makes double no sense because the creator of Bitcoin is from Australia, right?
Oh,
it's Naomi.
Right.
Don't you matter here?
Yes, I am the creator of Bitcoin. You're right. You've added
That's
me.
right.
No one like the CSW joke.
You heard it here first.
That's right.
I want to give people a little bit of context about what's going on in Australia right now. It is notoriously difficult to get into crypto in Australia. So I have friends who they'll write to me and they'll say, "Hey, Naomi, I want to get into this Bitcoin thing. How do I do it in Australia?" And so I kind of help them. I handhold them through this thing, and I give them a bunch of exchanges that I know operate in Australia. But the problem is the banks don't operate in Australia with crypto. So you can have an exchange that supposedly on paper operates there, but you'll go to your, Bank West account and they'll say, "Oh, no, we don't deal in crypto. You cannot send that money there." Then you'll go to your National Australia Bank and they'll say, "No, we don't deal with crypto. You can't send your money there." And you're like, how do I get my money onto one of these exchanges that supposedly operates here? So the Australian government really has clamped down in its efforts to stop crypto. And it's not like they put a ban out. They've just made it really difficult and deterred banks from dealing with it at all. So it's very difficult. Even like there's an exchange called the Independent Reserve. A lot of people use, and even then they say specifically, do not write anything about crypto in the memo for this transaction because it will get stopped. So I think this is just an extension of exactly as you guys said, this control that the government is trying to have over crypto, and this is just the next phase of it. First, they try to stop people getting involved with real cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, and then they say, "Oh, we've got one. You can finally enter the marketplace with our digital currency." Ben, you were going to say something, and Zach, you guys want to jump in here?
Yeah, I mean, just super briefly too, I think it's important to say, like, Australia is not the only country looking at this. Like, the US is looking at this, like tons of countries around the world are looking at this. China's already piloting it. Taiwan's looking at it. And there's a bunch of different stuff going on in this nature. And I think something that is really interesting though, and like has happened because of cryptocurrencies, is you're seeing a lot of them try to incorporate some level of privacy around like zero knowledge proofs and other stuff like this, which has really been further built out, various cryptographic kind of advancements in the cryptocurrency world that are starting to translate to more financial mainstream institutions. So just a little side note, but I think that's a really interesting way that crypto is driving privacy and security in other contexts as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to get to the big idea really quickly of whether CBDCs are going to be an on-ramp to the crypto ecosystem or a border fence to the crypto ecosystem. And I think Australia might be an interesting test case in that in the future. Naomi, I'm going to kick it back to you, and I think we're going to move on.
For sure. So we'll see what happens there with central bank digital currencies. But now let's talk about comics. Jen, what is going on in the DC world?
Well, from CBDCs to DC Comics, they don't want to give up their IP for NFTs. So this comes after an artist made obviously they made 1.85 million selling NFTs of his drawings online, and the drawings featured Wonder Woman. Sorry, I cannot speak today, and other licensed characters. So their legal team has actually sent a notice out to the artists that work for them and freelancers, and they've basically told them, if you have any plans on selling your artwork as NFTs, do not, because we will clamp down on you. So I don't know if they're going to be able to manage this. Like the thing that I immediately think about is fan art. Like, are they going to clamp down on fans? Like how it just seems like a real big mess. And yeah, I don't know how this is going to work. What do you guys think? Will, you a comic book fan?
Oh my. No, I'm not.
You're not a fan of anything fun. No baseball, no comics.
Americana.
No, comics are fine. I never really got into them, I guess. But I think, IP versus blockchains, that's definitely an interesting test case going forward as NFTs get bigger. Unfortunately, for a lot of these artists, their fingerprints are literally visible to everyone. So if you want to sue them, pretty easy. So that kind of sucks for them. I think you're right on the fan art piece. We'll see where that goes. I imagine that regardless, they'll just send cease and desist letters. And then for the bigger pieces, if they actually sell, they'll demand either a cut of the share, or I don't know, maybe even the NFTs be burnt. It's interesting because an NFT is just a hash of data. It's not anything more than that. And so the artwork itself, it would still fall under IP laws outside of how blockchains work. They'd still just be, taking licensed content and using it for your own personal gain. So the blockchain piece may not even get too complex here, minus that NFTs are just hot right now. And so people might try to make some more money off of fan art. But I'll toss it down to, I don't know, Ben, I feel like you're really hype on this. I don't know why. Am I wrong?
Oh, yeah. You missed all of last week, Will. I got back into NFTs in a big way. So sorry, just to catch you up there. Yeah. So no, I think this is going to be interesting because Marvel has the money to hire the lawyers to get this stuff out, right? They are all about their IP. They want to make sure that it is not disseminated in this way. And, this is sort of where the rubber meets the road in a lot of ways. And this is not a freewheeling market of ideas and art and all this other stuff. This is just kind of a reflection of how it is in the real world, licensing agreements and, IP lawsuits and all this other stuff. So to me, this makes, I guess, sense from Marvel's perspective, but it just sort of shows that, you can only go so far when trying to escape the constructs of modern life.
It's DC.
I'm going to jump in.
Sorry, DC, my mistake there. DC. They've also got all money. Yep.
So I want to jump in here. So one of my friends is an artist for DC. He actually sent me this letter last week, and I didn't take away from it the DC bans getting involved aspect. I took away from it that DC is about to enter the space. They literally start off the letter saying that NFTs are creating a big buzz. We plan to explore opportunities. We're diving in, and then it says, hold off doing your own thing. You're not allowed to do this outside of the scope of the work you're hired for with DC. But, freelance participation is going to be an integral part of this. So I think that we're going to start to see DC launch their own NFTs in the near future. And there's going to be all kinds of partnerships going on there, which is actually kind of interesting.
Yeah, I also think that's highly likely, given the pitches in my inbox right now, that various comic artists are going to be partnering with various platforms to get this stuff into the market as quickly as possible. We saw this with Gronk. We saw this with Patrick Mahomes. These are the individual creators in these larger universes who are trying to go out and do it their own way. But, as we've seen with NBA Top Shot, sometimes that officially licensed brand can make all the difference. So I think that, in addition to the existing sort of IP law that exists and may or may not have a different twist now that it's on the blockchain, I think this individual creators, individual athletes versus parent brand, parent league is sort of shaping up to be an interesting tension in the NFT land grab. So that's what I'm looking at.
For sure.
Also, when I was reading the story, I thought about just okay, let's move on.
Yeah, let's going on
so easily.
There's some heist thing going on in the NFT world. Ben, what's happening there?
I was going to say, let's move on like a freelance comic drawer after a DC cease and desist letter. Okay, into the world of digital art heist, which is a development that has been happening over the last couple of days, it looks like. Now, Nifty Gateway, a centralized marketplace for buying, selling, and creating NFTs, various users on there were having their accounts taken over. And I believe there are two instances going on here. One of their existing pre-purchased NFTs being moved and being sold by a third party that they did not authorize. And then two, also their credit card details attempting to be used to purchase additional NFTs. So what this means is that essentially hackers have taken over a few users' accounts. And now Nifty said in a statement this morning, it was a small number of users. And in fact, that none of the accounts had two-factor authentication turned on, which is a big old kind of red flag when it comes to any sort of security here. But to me, the idea of a digital art heist I thought was really interesting, because now you're also seeing users kind of say, hey, Nifty, like, what can you do to help us get our art back? And right now, it's a little unclear. I'm waiting back on an email from them, actually. So I want to toss this to the group. What are your initial thoughts? Is this a matter of people running into a market that is currently still saturated, or is this potentially something we might see more of going forward?
Yeah, I have a question for Jen. Do you think that...
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Do you think that newbies into the space understand this? Do you think that they know the dangers of like the permanence of these blockchain transactions? And do you think they're doing the right thing to secure themselves in general?
I think
lots of questions there.
Yeah, Ben, you go for it.
No, Jen, take it away, and then I'll jump in.
Okay. Well, I think there's so much hype around it right now. So everyone's just, trying to get involved really quickly and maybe not taking enough time to educate themselves on how to protect themselves and what exactly they're getting into. But I also think two-factor authentication is something that we should be doing not only when we're buying NFTs, but for most of our online transactions and interactions. So yeah, I think people are just rushing into it, not understanding what they're getting into. And unfortunately, they're being taken advantage of.
Yeah, the high level takeaway here is like turn on 2FA for everything. Generally, like if it's there, please use it. It's there for a reason. It lets you have to kind of allow access from an unknown, or notified if there's an unknown device trying to access your accounts or anything like that. And it lets you kind of shut those things down, and also sends you kind of one-time codes that you can use as a two-factor login for the most part. So that should be a part of anybody's like basic level cybersecurity of things. But I do think too that this points to an issue about a lack of understanding about sort of the irreversibility of some of these transactions when they happen in a decentralized way, right? Like I believe in one tweet I saw floating around, like Amex was able to stop one of the charges to try and buy a new NFT. And I think that's the mindset people are really used to in the world today, because it is so centralized. Like there is a level of a safety net that you can rely on. And when you enter into new spaces where that doesn't exist, that is something you take for granted in a lot of cases. And so this really highlights, some of the pitfalls in some ways of decentralization. You don't have that centralized control, but that can be a really double-edged sword.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's a scary territory for people as they start to realize this about blockchain. And as you said, we're so used to clicking that forgot password button. And that all of these things are retrievable if anything happens to it. And although people are always saying like, back up your keys, put on two-factor, be really careful with your security. We say these things, but let's be honest, at the end of the day, this stuff is difficult and it takes time out of your day, and it's not at the forefront of people's minds because it doesn't affect them. And so they don't really care about it that much until it personally affects them. So hopefully this is a learning curve for people who haven't taken their security seriously in the past.
I will say that losing a bunch of money is the best way to learn really quickly.
Dang. Okay.
If you think of it like tuition for the school of crypto hard knocks, that way is a good approach to that. So that's just people paying tuition. All right, gang.
Comforting.
Thanks for the time with us today on The Hash. I'm pretty excited about the lineup for tomorrow's First Mover, so I'm going to tease it. It's not on the script, but we have Gary Vaynerchuk, and we also have Metakovan, who spent $69.3 million on a Beeple NFT. His purchase was announced, I believe it was Friday, by Christie's, and we are speaking to him tomorrow. That's going to be fun. Until then, adios. We have All About Bitcoin coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern. We have The Hash coming up tomorrow afternoon, so come back for that. And I'm just going to say bye. So, bye. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.